This is a radio broadcast addressed from the League of Nations on the global war effort against the Morgana threat, where we report the recent happenings amongst the major nations contributing to the defense of our united front. I am your speaker, Ammaraglio Maus, but you may refer to me as Commissar, or simply the Speaker, whichever you or your government prefers. We're now in week 2 of October, and we find ourselves to be in dire straits with the recent collapse and capitulation of the Republic of Poland. The land war in Europe has quieted down for now, but that won't last long as troops begin to move and nations prepare for the coming storm that follows the silence. And in all this, the Morgana seem to be reacting as well. First up, news from the League itself. The collapse of Poland shook the League to its core this week, and the recent meeting was a reflection of that. Many delegates began arguing of what the proper course of action was, whether it be hard-hitting sanctions for the invaders or ignoring the issue in face of the greater threat. Many delegates simply got up and left the proceedings. As a result, no war plan was voted upon this week, as no consensus could be reached. It was a rather pitiful and regretful display by the League, hopefully one that does not continue to happen. However, despite the concerning turn of events within the League of Nations, there was still hope. Oddly enough this week, the fate of the League of Nations' grand project of a united front against the Morgana seemed to turn on the actions of a charismatic Bell captain who assembled an improvised international fleet, valiantly lifted the Morgana siege of Rotterdam, though not before the destruction of Wilhelmsburg, and then took to the Dutch airwaves to argue for the importance of the upcoming Zurich Conference. It was almost shocking proof that an international neutrality fleet could be effective, that Bells could overcome language barriers as well as the Morgana missed, and that hope for a better world wasn't entirely unreasonable. Even the Morganas took notice of this. Rumor has it several observed Morgana fleets have begun to move since this event. However, no discernible pattern or possible plan has been observed by their fleet movements as of this time. Following that, we have news from Italy, who continues to be the leading nation contributing to our united front against the Morgana. After the startlingly quick fall of Poland, the focus of the war now shifted to the Western Front, with the question being how strong was Germany truly, and how long could Italy remain neutral and still be counted among the strong? In the battle of empires, one could not sit still for very long. The Morgana attacks on Genoa and La Spezia had left Italy angry, and now that was paying dividends. Citizens flocked to the ports and harbors to sign on with the Regia Marina. It was among the best weeks of recruitment in the whole war, and the government took no small degree of satisfaction from it. This week, likely influenced by the influx in manpower, Mussolini made his intentions clear to Italian military command: expand the great influence of Italy by any means necessary. Upon delivering this ultimatum to military staff, sources say Mussolini further clarified his intentions, which are to undermine British influence in Greece or to pressure Yugoslavia into submission. No compromises are to be made in this decision. Between a rock and a hard place, the Regia Marina decided to support Mussolini's plan for Yugoslavia through the war plan Spazio Vitale Yugoslavia, which found 83% support from captains. The planners now cast their gaze across the Adriatic Sea. The jewels of the coastline of Yugoslavia were cities built and fed by Venice in its glory days, and by Rome before that, of which Italy had not forgotten. What that would mean, whether diplomatic overtures, military pressure, or outright invasion, was locked within the mercurial mind of Mussolini. Subsequently, new orders were issued to the Regia Marina to maintain war footing for the possibility of a specific and limited conflict not to exceed 3 months in duration. Refits were to be delayed and attrition patched as much as possible during this period. Of course, some wondered if more attention should have been directed towards the Aegean, where the general weakness of the British Royal Navy increasingly invited recognition of a new dominant naval power within the Mediterranean. Then again, perhaps the old lion wasn't so weak after all, and perhaps the Greeks were willing to gamble on it. Following that, we cast our gaze to the Pacific for news from the Empire of Japan, who, like a rising sun, has become the second leading nation in combating the Morgana threat, surpassing many nations, including the United States, in just a single week. Perhaps they are attempting to wash away the dishonor brought on by the attack of Tokyo, or perhaps simply to outshine the Imperial Japanese Army. Regardless, their recent substantial efforts are nonetheless impressive and awe-inspiring. In wake of the attack on Tokyo, the Imperial Japanese Army had begun fortifying the coast, and for Prime Minister Yunai Mitsumasa there were still fires for his young government to put out. Rumors of the Funayuri sedition spreading up poison in the Yellow Sea and along the Korean peninsula required responses both dramatic and subtle. The Imperial Japanese Navy, hoping to strike the problem down swiftly, enacted the war plan The Northern Road, of which 74% of captains were in favor of. Through this, the Imperial Japanese Navy increased its presence in the areas that the enemy had found to be vulnerable, and potential intelligence assets were sought out on land as well. In the end, the message was clear. There would be no uprisings. There would be no threat to Japanese control. Not so in the south, however. The Imperial Japanese Army had sent 100,000 men to fight the Chinese in Changsha, to deliver a win that would wipe away the stain of their defeat in Nomonhan. And this week, to the surprise of many generals, those men were subsequently defeated by the armies of the Republic of China. It was a bitter blow to the Japanese prestige, regardless of who was in power. Unpleasant questions about the strength of Japan's heretofore steady hold on the Guangdong bridgehead around Hong Kong began to raise questions that the government couldn't easily answer. Meanwhile, in the waters near Taiwan, Funayuri seemed to be hunting for something, or someone, and in ever-growing numbers. Those in the area should be extra cautious while traversing the sea, just to be safe. Of final note, Japanese observers at the embassy in Warsaw were permitted to depart the city before it fell. But what they observed was that Germany's feat of arms offered lessons far beyond what the Imperial Japanese Army was presently capable of. An alliance between Germany and the Soviet Union was therefore of great concern to the Empire of Japan. Following that, we head across the Pacific to the shores of the United States, the third contributing nation to our united front. The first priority for the nation after the conclusion of the Panama Conference was the Panama Canal itself. Franklin Delano Roosevelt knew the Morgana couldn't be allowed to block the easiest line of communication between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The powers that be within the United States government, specifically the Senate and the House of Representatives, were almost unanimous in their decision regarding the matter of Atlantic-Pacific security. The meetings were short, and deliberation on the matter was even shorter, with delegates from both lower and upper chambers voting 87% in favor of the war plan, Two-Ocean Navy. Only hours after the plan passed, Franklin Delano Roosevelt publicly announced what is now known as the Two Oceans Navy Act, in which the United States will expand the combat capabilities of its Navy and coastal defenses, with an approximate $7.5 billion being authorized for said expansion program. Subsequently, the Army began expanding the defenses at Fort Amador and Grant, and additional land was leased from the, albeit very nervous, Panamanian government to be developed into additional fortifications. Inspections of all ships transiting the Panama Canal now took place well away from the torpedo booms, and trade through the Caribbean was buoyed by the strong presence of the American battle fleet. In the need to escort supplies and currency to Panama, the United States Navy temporarily limited its escort duties further north, and the Morgana took advantage. However, the Germans did not. In one case, the SS City of Flint was briefly intercepted by a German vessel, only to be promptly released back to her own itinerary, with as much information as the Germans could provide about the Morgana activity in the area. More insultingly still, the Morgana cowardice began to make its presence more widely felt, as if suggesting, or taunting, that the American emphasis on consolidation, preparation, and defense actually reflected a lack of resolve. In other news, the fall of Warsaw in just 6 weeks prompted great interest in the Army, and although the collapse of resistance was fast, it was probable that the entry of the Soviet Union was the decisive factor. It prevented Polish lines from stabilizing the front and turning the invasion into a quagmire similar to the Great War. Certainly, some lessons could be drawn about the uses of aircraft, however. After that, we take a hop across the pond to the United Kingdom, who is the 4th contributing member to the war against the Morgana threat. 2 weeks ago, the Royal Navy had made a furious effort to drive Morgana forces away from the shores of India. This week, the British government began to take advantage of that. The Houses of Parliament convened and after some deliberation found 81% support for the enactment of War Plan the Royal Indian Navy, which Prime Minister Chamberlain announced later that day with the approval of His Majesty. As a result, patrols around India were heightened, and investments into the local economy were increased alongside naval facilities and academies. Training and currency flowed into the shipyards of Bombay in particular, which has nearly doubled in size and operational capabilities as a result. Hopefully, it will be a place from which the ranks of the Royal Navy might one day grow. It was an extraordinary gift to the merchant ships in the Arabian Sea as well, with the Regia Marina fighting Morganas in East Africa and the Royal Navy stamping them down in the West. The flow of commerce was alive in a way it hadn't been for many months. Closer to home, however, the fall of Poland demanded that the much-delayed British Expeditionary Force be sent to France to aid their ally. The Royal Navy had admirably shown that they could hold the Channel, and despite the heavy Morgana activity along the Dutch coast and the Skagerrak Strait, the Expeditionary Force began the crossing. If the Morgana were able to take liberties in the Shetlands as a result, well, so be it, said one British captain. The fall of Poland was perhaps inevitable, given the failure of the Tsar offensive and the Soviet intervention. But the naval situation was altogether positive, and the strength of French defenses on the Western Front reassured even the gravest doubts. Winter, too, meant that strength could be gathered in a methodical way. Now the question was how effective the blockade would be, and where the best armies could be placed to disrupt what was clearly going to be a variant of the Schlieffen Plan. In other news, the Greek government responded to growing ties between Turkey and Italy by close consultation with the minister to Greece. The Finns have also sent a delegation to London, but it's unclear to the degree to which Chamberlain's position has changed since June. Meanwhile, Morgana activity noticeably increased near the trade lanes at the Cape of Good Hope, perhaps seeing them as an easier target. After that comes news from France, the fifth contributing nation to our united front. The state of the world was perilous. Now that Poland had fallen, it was only a matter of time before the Western Front became active again, and the French knew this. However, the Battle of the North Sea had stupid Germany in the Baltic for a time, and no general offensive could be expected during the winter. In any event, the experience of the Saar offensive indicated no great strength on the border. Furthermore, the defenses at Maginot were impregnable, and as it was certain that the Germans would try the Schlieffen Plan again, there was ample time to prepare a defense that would bleed the enemy white. Despite the shocking collapse of Poland, perhaps the threat from Germany was not so very great after all. The colonies, however, could not be long neglected. Representatives of the French government convened earlier this week to discuss War Plan the Eastern Question, which currently holds 91% support. The French Antilles benefited from the success of the United States Navy. Africa was thus far untroubled by Morgana. The problems of North Africa seemed easily addressed, but Hanoi was vulnerable and very far away. Daladier and his advisors outlined their diplomatic options in broad strokes. There were 4 potential plans. 1. Work within the alliance. The Royal Navy had a presence in the Pacific, and it was possible that they could be persuaded to cover Indochina in common defense of their worldwide alliance. 2. Revive the policies of George Clemenceau. The Japanese had a new government. Their war effort in China had been badly complicated by the arrival of the Morgana, and they were hungry for resources. And, interestingly, they had been among the most vocal proponents of a coordinated international naval response to the new common foe. It seemed possible that they would respond favorably to diplomatic overtures. 3. Send reinforcements and material from France and the other colonies. France might invest directly, straining its own resources for a time, but ultimately it was the certain way to maintain prestige. 4. Cede a degree of sovereignty to local powers, fracturing the united front and setting Indochina on the path to independence within the Francophone world. Now it only remained to make said choice. Elsewhere, Morgana sightings around Madagascar began to rise as their fleets drifted south away from Mogadishu. Following that, we have news from Germany, the sixth contributing nation against the Morgana threat. The invasion of Poland has come to an end this week, with Adolf Hitler himself flying into the ruins of Warsaw for a victory parade. The last Polish forces capitulated on the 11th of October. The garrison of Hell attempted to flee into internment in Sweden, but the Kriegsmarine ensured that there would be no such escape. The invasion had not gone to timetable, and certainly some part of that could be attributed to the Morgana and the response of the Kriegsmarine. The lessons learned had been numerous and valuable nonetheless. The application would need to keep until spring, however. In the interim, training and planning would continue unabated. In the end, without Allied intervention or different policy from the Soviet Union, the Morgana had slowed the destruction of Poland, but it could not have been stopped. Subsequently, no new orders for the Kriegsmarine had come from Berlin recently, whose leaders were likely too preoccupied celebrating their victory over Poland. As a result, admirals from the Kriegsmarine decided to take the initiative this week through the war plan Blockade Loosened, which found 70% support from captains. Admiral Donitz relaxed restrictions on neutral trade and reduced exclusion zones, and U-boat commanders broadly agreed to follow the international rules on submarine warfare as strictly as possible. It meant U-boat crews suffered a far greater exposure to danger, but offered an equally reduced chance of a provocation to the United States. The definitive test of the policy came in the form of a Kriegsmarine encounter with the SS City of Flint, which was stopped, searched, and released without further incident on the 9th of October. Apart from the U-boats, the Kriegsmarine remained largely absent from the North Sea following its defeat by the Allies in the previous week, and it seemed that was an invitation to the Morgana. They crashed into the Dogger Bank and started nibbling their way north along the Dutch coast, sinking anything afloat, including a U-boat driven out of position by hunting Morgana. Clearly, the squabbling and conflict among nations is actively hindering our war against the Morgana, with this time the Dutch suffering the consequences. Hopefully, this is not a sign of things to come. Finally, we turn our attention to our comrades in the Northeast, the Soviet Union, who is the seventh contributing nation to our united front. Polish resistance in Lublin was almost the last in the war, but finally even they capitulated. The rest of their troops surrendered, were destroyed seeking escape, or crossed into Romania and internment. The partition of Poland had been a test of the strength and the character of this new Germany, and it appeared that Hitler was capable of keeping his word. As part of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Eastern Poland was granted to the Soviets for their part in the invasion. Following the capitulation of Poland, the Politburo was divided as to where the Union should focus their effort, though that decision seemed to be made after a strange occurrence on the northern shore. In the aftermath of the victory won at Polyani, a message in a bottle made of cleared diamond was brought to Archangels by a half-mad fisherman. He claimed the Morgana Adverse had given it to him, and that it was a message for the Secretary General himself. The message was duly passed on to the NKVD. They presumably destroyed it. I reached out to my friends in the NKVD, who reported that the fisherman was later released to be with his fishes again after being heavily questioned, but they would not divulge any information regarding the whereabouts of said bottle. What was written in said letter? None of us will likely know that answer, but reports say that Avarice has been sighted less and less after the mysterious delivery of her bottled message. If it was true that there were far fewer sightings of avarice in the White Sea and in the Baltic, there is now far more sightings of starvation, however. In other news, the city of Belomorsk at the terminus of the White Sea-Baltic Canal has seen new construction on the harbor's edge. What that exactly is currently unknown to us here at the station, and my contacts in the Union also seem to have no answer. Not any they're allowed to share, at least. And with that concludes the League of Nations War Report for Week 2 of October. Despite how hard it can be to put aside our differences, we encourage all of the nations to continue working together in order to tackle the Morgana threat to secure humanity's future. And as a reminder to all captains and citizens alike that this League of Nations broadcast is intended on keeping you informed about the unified war effort against the Morgana. But for those of you who want to do more than just listen, there is something you and only you alone can do. Consider purchasing some much-needed war bonds to help our boys and girls on the front line stay safe and well-equipped against our destructive invaders. Your funds mean more bullets, shells, and bombs that can be flung at the Morgana, making our oceans and worlds a safer place. Not only that, but purchasing war bonds will net you prestige among your peers that you captains in particular can utilize to gain more resources, dock and harbor space, and personnel for your own war efforts so that you too can take the fight straight to the Morgana doorstep. Thank you for listening, and may you have smooth seas.